Okay, folks, we're going to get started in a few minutes. We're already 1 minute behind. Let's go.
I'm not allowed to say what kind of time we're on.
Yeah, no, that's right. Eh?
Yeah, apparently that's
Indigenous time, does that work?
there we go.
Mark, are you back there? Mark Dokis? Can I see Mark? No? Okay. Someone with a big, loud voice, go tell people to come inside. Mark's got that voice that just carries. He works in our office and he's at the other end of the hallway and we can hear him.
Sorry, 1 hour? Or is it 1 hour and 15?
1 hour, but
1 hour?
It's lunch after,
oh,
right?
okay,
So
yeah.
we're supposed to finish at noon, break at noon rather. Okay, so I see just a few people still coming in, so I'll kind of give them a minute or two. Actually, I'll take this opportunity. I just want to mention again, I'm going to mention the sponsors as much as possible, right? So FCC, we got some FCC people here. Fern Software, the Fern guys are in the exhibitor booth. They'll be in here once in a while, but I don't think Eamon or Kyle are here. I believe they're at the booth. Meridian, anybody from Meridian here? No?
Yeah, they are. They're here.
Okay. It's hard to see. Okay. Got a few folks from Meridian and Futurepreneur.
And, yeah.
Futurepreneur. All right, so we're going to get started. Just one quick note before we do. So if anybody ordered the Indigenous Prosperity boxes, so those were sold online, they were supposed to arrive on Monday here, and we are now Wednesday morning and they are still not here. So you can check at the end of the day at the NACA booth in the exhibitor area. Hopefully they come in by the end of the day, or at least enough for those that ordered one to pick up at the forum. Okay, and then I think there's going to be some extra ones to buy if anybody didn't get a chance to buy one. Okay, so let's get going here. So our next panel, so we have one panel and then we're going to break for lunch. Okay, lunch is going to be served out there. You can come back inside in here to eat. So our first panel, where am I? Oh yeah. So this is introducing the Indigenous Growth Fund. You may have heard us talk about that. So you're going to hear a lot more about it, way better than I could explain. So Frank Bush, come on up, Frank.
Thank you. Clap them. Oh, I haven't heard that sound in a couple of years. How about you guys, eh? So, hey, Terry Goodtrack, I see you there. I'm going to come find you later. Tanse Kakia, Ketata Miskatenawa. I greet every one of you individually, obviously under the new protocols, hugging, handshaking. It's kind of taboo nowadays, but I'm going to do it anyway. So if I do that and you don't want that, apparently this is what you're supposed to do. Just give me that signal, like, nope. Germs, COVID, right? So I am double vaccinated and I've had COVID twice, so should be good to go. So yeah, really glad to be here. Any Indigenous entrepreneurs in the room? Anyone? Oh, there we go. Lo Abib, good to see you. Very nice. So I myself am also an Indigenous entrepreneur. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Nation Fund Access Capital Corporation. And I also sit on the board of 3 publicly traded companies. So I am a registered insider on the Toronto Stock Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange as well. So very glad to be here talking about the Indigenous Growth Fund, because I know that the one thing entrepreneurs need more than anything else is money. Correct? Am I wrong? Just money and something to do with that money, some way to apply that capital. I'd like to introduce the panel, and maybe we'll start over at the end, just because I like his name the best. So go ahead, introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Frank Richter. I'm the managing director of the Indigenous Growth Fund. I've been with NACA over 5.5 years now, and over the last year and a bit, I've been managing the establishment and rollout of the IGF, and have been involved in the discussions and negotiations leading up to the first close on the IGF.
Thank you. Alison?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Alison Nankerville. I'm Senior Vice President of Fund Investments at BDC Capital. So I was Frank's partner in crime in working on building this fund. Delighted to have had a journey of 18 months to get us to where we are. Are absolutely delighted to see so many supporters, including our Crown Corporation colleagues who are co-investors with us in the fund here today. Thanks.
Wajeg miswe shana mitahtoavan tishnaka sombita begondoschin gitu noch gitchmenen den ometagog miswe egonake nakashkachano gitchmenen den ometagog kaim hetano megwach nakashkachano mikoch.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Geraldine. I'm the Director of Finance at NEDC, and we're excited to be taking part in this opportunity to access the Indigenous Growth Fund and share it with everybody here.
And that's really why we're here today. So maybe we'll just start very simply. I'll start with Shannon, and maybe you can just give us an overview, like what is the Indigenous Growth Fund?
I should probably translate. I introduce myself all in Cree, and I sometimes
Oh no, they all
forget to do
understand.
that.
Everybody speaks Swampy Cree, right? So, or Mushkego. That was Mushkego, right?
Oh, Mushkego Cree speakers.
I know
out
my
there
Uncle
know exactly
Dave
what I
there
said.
understood every word, so yeah.
I do. I forget that translation sometimes. But I'm the CEO of NACA, and I started 5.5 years ago, just like Frank. And what the board told me in my first meeting when I was being interviewed is that we have this ongoing barrier of access to capital, and we need you to focus on that as a main priority. Now, I think Jean-Vincent listed out all the achievements that NACA's have had over the past 5.5 years, and I think we've made a tremendous impact. But the one that I'm most proud of is providing a tool that allows the supply side to meet with the demand side, and that's launching this Indigenous Growth Fund. Now, this Indigenous Growth Fund is that mechanism to raise private sector capital, allow the supply side a place to put their money, their investment, and allow the AFIs, who have been doing for 35 years an amazing job of deploying more than 50,000 loans to $3.3 billion in lending. So that's quite an infrastructure that's out there. There's AFIs in this room that are our members. And I encourage you to introduce yourself to each and every one of them because they have the experience. They've been through everything. The growth, the ups and the downs, and they are waiting for loans to be repaid in order to issue new loans. And that's not a good position to be in. 40% of our network doesn't have capital to lend. So that's why this Indigenous Growth Fund is so important. And our partner at the Crown Corporations and BDC in particular, and Alison will be able to dig into it a little bit more. But it's introducing a fund and an instrument that meets our needs. We can't afford high cost capital to relend to our entrepreneurs because we know who it'll impact. So we got to find a mechanism to provide low cost capital so that our AFIs can in turn lend it to our entrepreneurs. They've been operating for 30 years at the same sort of funding levels, whereas the value of money has been going down. So we need to increase with the times, with inflation, give them access to capital and let them do their work, increase the size of their loans, the complex businesses that we're starting to see. And the Indigenous Growth Fund is going to raise that private sector capital, lend it to our AFIs, and we've got an AFI up here to represent and tell that story. And then our entrepreneurs will see the results of that on the ground. Thank you.
So how much you got in this Indigenous Growth Fund?
It's a $150 million growth fund. And it's funny that me and Frank attended a Harvard program in 2017 and designing it on just a notepad and saying that, so we've tried the standard approach of going to government, issuing a business case and saying, this is what we need. And I think everybody understands that standard approach. And it's just not sustainable. The government spent $9 billion in '96, $17 billion a couple of years ago, and it's projected to be $35 and $40 billion into the future. There's just no way Government of Canada is going to be able to cover those needs. We need to invest more in sustainability into the future. You're seeing the Clearwater deal as an example of an Indigenous owned and operated industry business. I think we're going to see more of that into the future. And I forgot where I was going with that.
No, I think you got there. Bottom line, for those Indigenous entrepreneurs here in the room, there's 150 million you could access through your AFI, and we'll get a little bit deeper into that. Frank, why don't you tell them who's eligible for the fund?
Yeah, sure. So the main goal of the Indigenous Growth Fund is to provide more capital to AFI so that they can support more small, medium-sized Indigenous businesses. So it's Indigenous, privately owned and community-owned enterprises that are, at the end of the day, eligible to receive loans with IGF capital. And from the business side, the business would always apply to an AFI. They wouldn't directly go to the IGF. It's then the AFI that goes to the IGF when they see, hey, I've got so many deals to fund on my desk here that I can't do it anymore with the money I have right now in my loan portfolio or with any of the repayments that are coming back, as Shannon said. Then an AFI can come to IGF and apply for a credit facility to provide them with more capital. We would then look at the application, and we have an independent investment committee that at the end of the day makes the decisions about these applications. And I'm happy that I believe all the investment committee members are in the audience here, so you can chat with them later on as well if you like. Michael Rice is on the investment committee, Helen Bobby-Walsh and Kim Baird, all very seasoned folks who know the AFI network, know the challenges that Indigenous businesses face when it comes to accessing capital. So really happy about that. The money in the fund, as you know, comes from the investors, and our long-term goal is, building on what Shannon's saying, is to be able to tap into non-government sources of investment, and we want to prove that out over the next years that we can do that with this model. I think what's interesting is that from a business perspective, we actually don't impose a whole lot of restrictions on the AFI and say, hey, you can only invest in loans or provide loans with IGF money that are between $100,000 and $250,000, or it all has to go into 3 types of industries. We're pretty agnostic on that. We say it has to go to Indigenous businesses, and it should be developmental lending. But beyond that, we're really leaving it by and large up to the AFI to see where the needs in the community are and what are the right loan sizes, what are the industries that need capital in their region. So that's what the money is intended to do, and it's really the idea of using the autonomy of the AFIs and allowing them to make the right decisions locally.
Okay. And so how is it different from a typical government program?
So what's really different is that we have repayable money here, unlike with a traditional government program where it's a one-way street, money goes out only once. We do have investors in the fund who can, in the long run, redeem some of their investment in the fund. So that means we have to make sure that money could be repaid to the IGF when investors are requiring repayment. So there comes some different due diligence, I would say, than maybe with a traditional government program. I think on the upside, what we have here is an investment vehicle that is not time limited by a federal budget and could be canceled with the next election. The IGF is really structured to be around for the long run, independently of what evolving government policy might be. So there comes a lot of certainty with the type of vehicle that we've set up as well.
So we're not quite as worried as specific calendar dates like April 1st that you'd normally see in a lot of the government funding programs. This can be kind of done with the timing of business, I guess.
That's right. So we've opened for applications last October, and we're going to be open for applications from AFIs for capital ongoing from this point out. And we're not tied to the first 15 million has to be spent by March 31st, 2022, or it lapses. There are some triggers or timelines in the agreements, but it is very different in that sense from a government program. It's much more driven by the business needs, much longer time horizons, I think. Much more sustainable in the long run, because we can also bring in other private sector investors if we see there's additional capital that we need to grow the fund, or if some investors want to redeem some of their investment, we can attract new investment. And we're quite happy to see that there's a lot of interest to invest in vehicles like this. Awesome. So it's been really a pleasure to see that over the last year.
Yeah, well, in my experience in capital markets is this is exactly what they've been waiting for. It's a conduit for investment to meet various goals that they may have, especially on the ESG side. We'll talk about more of that later. But switching gears here, I guess we want to start talking to an AFI. How about that, right? So lucky for us, we have Geraldine with us from NEDC. Could you describe a little bit about NEDC and its structure for our guests?
Yeah, for sure. But before I do that, let's celebrate the sustainability of this fund.
Yes.
Like, it's AFIs moving forward to do the next step. We're not just accepting money from the government anymore. It's more than that. I think that really needs to be celebrated.
Absolutely.
So NEDC, we're on Vancouver Island, way out west, and we're governed by a board of directors. And they set the governance standard for NEDC. They set out clear policies and procedures that everybody there, everybody there needs to follow. And it's really important that we follow those, because it means that at the end of the day, our decisions are based on our policy. It doesn't mean that we're saying yes to one person and no to another for the same reason or different reasons. Like, it's just really great that way. And I feel like it really guides NEDC's successful lending practices. And then it's important to take into consideration, as an AFI, you are lending to a comparatively small market, and there's so many intertwining relationships and everybody knows each other. So if somebody finds out that you lent money to another person when you said no to them for that exact same reason, it can really create a lot of inconsistency, and it spreads like wildfire. It's not okay. And so that's where we fall back on those strong governance practices to ensure that we're just lending to Indigenous businesses and being very clear about how we do that.
And it's on the basis of the merits of the business rather than political or other factors, correct?
Yeah, for sure. And so for NEDC, it's important to lend based on the viability of the business. If the business is viable, then yes, we'll lend. And not just is the business viable, but is the client a good fit for that business? And once those two boxes are checked off, then we begin to work with them and build a plan moving forward. If those boxes are not checked off, then what kind of feedback can we give to the client, and in a timely manner, so that they can make the best decision based on that information? And I feel like that really gives the client empowerment, and it puts the ball back in their court to make the decision based on what's best for them, what's best for their business, and just how they'll move forward.
So now there's a really good reason we have Geraldine up here, is that NEDC was the first AFI to access the Indigenous Growth Fund. And I understand that was with a $10 million loan. So we're talking real business here, aren't we?
We are, yeah. And the drive for that was our average loan size increased from $50,000 to $500,000 to loans of $1 million going out to businesses that have been built generation by generation, as people are learning from their forebears, from their parents, and growing up in entrepreneurial families and carrying on that line.
Yeah, and as an evergreen fund, so this company, every payment they make, money is coming back into the fund to grow it. So what really excites me is what that's going to look like 20 years from now as that money grows, and it truly is entrepreneurs helping entrepreneurs.
It really is, yeah. And that's something to celebrate, because right now we have money coming in, and how are we growing that? How are we continuing to give back to the entrepreneurs that really drive our business and drive who we are as AFIs?
Now, without getting too nebulous, because I understand there's likely non-disclosure agreements in place, but can you talk a little bit about the company, even just broadly, that was awarded this loan?
Yeah, so one of the companies that we awarded a loan to was the Huu-ay-aht First Nation, and they're on the far reaches of the west coast of Vancouver Island. The road to get there is currently not safe.
Never is.
No, it's an adventure. But they saw the need for that to improve. And they're actually partnering with the government to rebuild the road and make it safe for the people who live out there, for their own people, and just to increase the economic prosperity. So one of the things that they're doing, among many, is they're partnering with an Indigenous company from the East Coast to get into the shellfish industry.
Ooh.
And that's one of the ways that they're expanding their businesses. And then the other thing that they've been doing is buying up every business around them. And then...
So they're little shellfish. Won't do that. Go ahead. Sorry. Yeah. I'm a dad now, so I got to make the odd dad joke. It's in my contract. Sorry.
No, that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're taking back and owning and creating economic prosperity for their people. It's an amazing thing to see, like they're looking ahead to the future. And I think that's exciting, and it should really teach all of us as AFIs that we should look to the future and look to the sustainability of the money that we're lending out to entrepreneurs.
So you do talk to a lot of Indigenous entrepreneurs. So what are you hearing from them about their capital needs?
I'm hearing that their needs are getting bigger, because like I said before, they're growing up in entrepreneurial families. They're taking on the family business, they're expanding it, and they need capital to be able to do that. And so we have lent out as much as we possibly can. And so to be able to access this additional capital to continue helping entrepreneurs to grow their businesses, it's amazing. And not just that, but if they're not taking on the family business, then they're starting businesses of their own. And so it's important to us to be able to help every single client that we can, whether it's a startup and it's a very small loan, or they're expanding and it's a really large loan. And I find that just having access to this additional capital makes it so that we can help every entrepreneur that comes into our office with a viable business.
So being right on the ground floor there, what does the future look like to you in this space for Indigenous entrepreneurs now having this kind of access to capital?
Oh, that's a big question. I think it just allows us to continue what we're doing, to build on the strategy that we have right now, to provide the larger loans to the lower risk businesses and provide the smaller loans to the higher risk businesses. The diversification of that risk allows us to do both, and it decreases the risk to our portfolio, which is really important. And at the bottom line to all of this is helping the client. What does the client need? How can we help them? And it shouldn't matter the size of the loan. In the end, NEDC wants to be able to provide loans to any Indigenous business with a viable business plan, and whether it's $10,000 or $1 billion.
Well, it helps me a lot because I often help my clients to write those business plans. So yeah, it's really great that we now have this avenue to get in there. We're going to go to Shannon and Frank here. And building off what Geraldine was just saying, like, what does the launch of the IGF mean to Indigenous economic development in the country and economic development lending?
Well, I think when I give sort of the parameters of what we're looking for, and it wasn't an easy process, I gotta say, and Frank will talk about this. sometimes there's frustration coming back to the office because there's systemic barriers all across Canada, and I think we've seen what those are. It's embedded in the systems. And when you're asking for something that is fair, something that is new, something that'll sustain our people into the future, it takes time, and it takes re-strategizing, and it takes just resilience. That's what it took to work. And I'm so glad that Allison is here, and she's going to have an opportunity to talk about that. But the three parameters were perpetual access to capital. We don't want to be reinventing the wheel and going out and creating a whole new strategy. We want always access. Our AFIs needs a surety that they're going to be able to plan at their local level for what they need in their regions. They need low cost capital so that everybody is going to be able to sustain their organizations. And then the last one was that the AFI network is going to be able to have equity into this because the government backstop $50 million of this. Everything is repayable. So the Class G shares of the models that we have allows, as interest is earned, that NACA is able to buy shares at Class G. This ensures that the future equity of that fund is going to be Indigenous, and it's the AFI network that's going to be able to hold the ownership of that, so that they'll always have access. So we just continue to grow it. 150 is a beginning. I've seen other interest from about 100 million that want to invest, but we have to demonstrate, and our AFIs have to demonstrate that they're able to get that out there. And I know that they're going to respond. They're going to show that they can deploy that, and then we can start to grow that. So those are some of the.
Do you want to add anything to that, Frank?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we've heard for years and see in the data is that there is a growing number of Indigenous businesses, and Geraldine sort of touched on that too, saying that we're seeing now multi-generational businesses where you know, when AFIs were started in the 80s and 90s, somebody got a loan from an AFI and started a business, and now it's the second generation, their kids starting to become entrepreneurs. So there seems to be an expansion of businesses, in Indigenous owned businesses, and I think that will continue going forward. And what we're seeing is that the projects are getting larger with inflation. The cost for the projects are getting larger. The businesses are getting more complex with financing. What we still see is that the large number of these Indigenous businesses, any Indigenous business, but it applies to AFI funded businesses too, they are fairly small. They have somewhere between 1 and 4 employees, which is, if you look at all businesses in Canada, is unusually small still. So I think we will see years and then decades still of Indigenous businesses growing into the little bit more mid-size range. And I think that needs to be supported with capital, and really glad that we have this ongoing vehicle now to provide that capital that delivers the money through Indigenous controlled local lenders. I think that's a fantastic story.
Yeah, and I think that's basically what Adam Pfizer was talking about this morning in terms of like what the data is telling us. And are you seeing that firsthand, the kind of the ripple effect occurring in that? Like, we're talking intergenerationally, but then also is there like are we seeing a buildup, you know, where Indigenous entrepreneurs are maybe getting a little braver because there's opportunity to access more capital?
So I don't think we can see it right in the data we own, but I do think that we see a growth in the businesses. So there's I think a change in entrepreneurs are taking on and having a larger vision for their business. They see that they can grow their business further than a very, very small type of business. That's what I'm hearing from the AFI. The AFIs that we talk to quite a bit.
Yeah, and that's kind of been my experience throughout my life. I think the only entrepreneurs I knew growing up were some of the ladies making moccasins to sell at powwows and that. We have some of these crafters here. And then on the commercial fisheries. So we had Indigenous fishers, and I really love to see in my lifetime where that's gone from, you know, for us in northern Manitoba being kind of shut out of the fisheries by hydro development, growing that back, but then all the way to now what we're seeing with NEDC and on the East Coast with the Mi'kmaq nations who have gotten into the Clearwater buyout and that, like it's really wonderful to see that growth. And it's, I think, a testament to that entrepreneurial spirit that I think a lot of people don't think Indigenous people have. But I think everybody in the room knows that we do have that. So
you were talking about conditions. I just wanted to add, what we've seen over the last 20 years is a decline in support services for AFIs, and that's something that we have to really recognize. When you talk about the lifespan and the pathway for a person to start a business, you have to start at planting that seed with youth, with understanding, with capacity programs, and we're seeing that with our women's program that we're launching right now. I just presented to 20 business service officers. I used to work for Wabatech, and I'm very proud of that. We used to have 5 business service officers there working with the entrepreneurs to line up projects, to pump people up, to get excited about entrepreneurship as a start. That same organization only has 1 or 2 business services officers working with our employees, or with our entrepreneurs. So that sets like a bad, I don't know, you're not setting up the market to be successful. Now we're sending a signal with this IGF that we're now investing in programs and services that'll meet their needs in the future. So the people that are thinking about surviving on the day-to-day can start thinking about the future as being part of the economy, being part of prosperity. And that's what this signal is. And every program and service we add, where we're supporting the whole pathway, every partner and every ally in here is part of that.
Awesome. Allison, sorry, we've been very quiet here, but yeah, for me, this is get to the good stuff, right? So a little more technical now, right, everybody? But can you describe for everybody, so that I could understand it, right? How is the fund structured?
Yeah, no, kind of think about it high level. I think there's a few things that made this fund very distinctive. One is that I think both Shannon and Frank mentioned, it's evergreen. It has no end. A lot of funds out there in the market, they're there for 10 or 12 years and then they finish like a government program. This goes on, and the value, as Shannon was saying, is that the money circulates out into the community through the AFIs. It comes back as payments to the fund, both in the forms of interest payments and principal payments back into the fund, and the fund recirculates it back out. And every time the fund circulates, what the important part, as Shannon was mentioning, is we have different classes of investors in the fund. You have government investors whose interest payments are on their share of the capital are getting channeled back into the fund manager to grow their ownership of the fund over time. The Crown corporations, ourselves, EDC, FCC, who are investors, a portion of the interest payments on loans that are part of our ownership in the fund, we divert a part of our interest payments that we receive through the fund over to NACA as the fund manager to, again, grow their ownership in the fund. And private investors receive just the full market return on the loans that comes back in the form of interest payments. So the beauty of this is that as the money cycles out and comes back in, NACA as the fund manager grows its ownership of the fund over time. So it's a social impact on 2 levels. This is impact through the AFIs into their communities, helping these incredible entrepreneurs who are growing in their capital needs because they're successful, because they're ambitious. But the impact is also we're facilitating an economic empowerment, Indigenous ownership of the fund, of that capital, so it becomes a permanent source of capital for NACA and the AFI community to continue to lend and grow over time, as Shannon was saying. And that fund, because it's evergreen, over time has the ability to just keep inviting in new investors. So right now you've got Crowns in, you've got the government in. We are expecting in a little while to bring private investors in. And those private investors are very keen to come in because this is an institutional quality fund. And that is something at scale that investors have been waiting for. People have wanted, as private investors, to engage with the Indigenous community and just didn't have a mechanism to do it. So by putting this fund together, we've pooled a whole lot of people who've wanted to work in partnership with the Indigenous community. in a way that makes it easy for them to do and leave the control and the empowerment of how those lending activities happen in the hands of the Indigenous community.
You know, I think there's been quite a lack of exposure to the capital markets by and large within the Indigenous community. So I know on our end, this is, you know, fairly new, but within the capital markets, you know, what makes this innovative amongst funds?
I think the first one is that, as I said, you've got institutions like the Crown's Inn that are vetting that we've set this up to be institutional quality, both in the types of credit analysis happening, the reporting, the financial reporting that comes back on the underlying activity, and just the good governance about, you know, we're investors in the fund, we have a fund manager in the form of NACA, they report back to us. It's a partnership, right? But it's being done, you know, as Geraldine was saying, with strong governance and policies in place. And policies allow you to be consistent. And that's something that investors have been looking for. And they've been looking for that ability to do it at scale, right? So not just, you know, looking, can I put 100,000 in, but I want to put 5 million in the fund, right? And that's because there's a whole category of larger investors out there who want to write larger checks into an at-scale fund. So I think that's what's really distinctive here, is we've built something at scale.
You know, and that's something I always have a bit of a difficulty describing to people, is the sheer volume of what's out there in the capital markets. We've all kind of just inherited this concept of scarcity of money, right? Because all the money seemed to come from the government, and there was always a budget, and it was never enough, and there was all these hurdles to jump through. But, you know, I think one of the lessons I got to learn, luckily in my career, is that most of the money the government uses actually comes from the capital markets. Right, so you know, and maybe just digressing a little bit here, I got to do a dealer shadow at one of the major banks on Bay Street, and they were actually doing a Canada bond auction, and it was something like $2.5 billion, and I was like, billion? What are you talking about? We only ever talk in thousands or maybe millions once in a while, but $2.5 billion, and they did the auction. It lasted about 17 minutes or something, and the banks, I think the bank I was with there, they got about 15% of this $2.5 billion and were disappointed that they got so little. And then they turned around and sold it to their institutional investors a few minutes later. So in half an hour, I got to see $2.5 billion change hands twice. And I remember saying to the guys, like, wow, I'm so honored that you would invite me here on this auspicious day for this Canada bond auction. And he looks at me like, are you crazy? We do this every Tuesday and Thursday. So the amount of money that's out there and available, but there just has never been a real great conduit for Indigenous entrepreneurs to access that kind of money, right? Until now, right? So why was it important to structure the IGF in that way? Was it to mainly be able to create that appeal to private investors? Were you looking beyond kind of the now and into the future?
Well, I think what's unique about this is this was a co-creation. This was a partnership of us working together, sitting down and saying, what do you need? What does NACA need to do to create the capacity that Shannon's talking about that's out there in the AFI community? So it's like, first of all, starting with the needs, and then, you know, coming back and on a blank piece of paper, designing that fund. And that's kind of a very unique approach. A lot of what's out in the capital markets is very standardized products. We built a product that met the needs of the Indigenous community by listening to what NACA was telling us the needs were. So that meant creating an evergreen so that it wasn't like a government program. It didn't have a finite ending. It has a class of shares that is social impact oriented, that it gives back the capital that gets returned to those to those investors in the fund, passes it over to NACA as becoming their ownership in the fund. I think that's what's really unique, is that a lot of times social impact funds focus on just what's happening at the community level. If I give money to this community, what are the good things that happen? But we saw this as an exercise where we understood what NACA was focused on was creating a permanent source of capital that they would continue to have and continue to be able to recycle. And by having that interest income get recycled back into the fund, and as it gets recycled, in ownership shifts over to NACA as the fund manager, it allows that, right? We're addressing both needs.
And if there are any government people in the room working on reconciliation, I really want you to hear what Allison just said. She listened and then partnered with. It's not that hard, but now why don't we go there, Shannon? Now that I've set the stage here, but what is connecting private equity capital to Indigenous communities? How does that help reconciliation efforts?
Well, I think the fastest growing market, and make no mistake that there is a lot of capital in the globe, and a lot of that capital is in the globe because our natural capital has been eroded in our traditional territories. So the world is rich because of us, and they're looking, and that money is now being looked at in a different lens. ESGI, CSR, social responsible investing. There's about $35 trillion that's in that space. The definition is different, and there's different levels. And we wanted to make sure that we created a fund that allows those investors to be measured in the market and investing in something that'll have an actual social impact. The presentation you heard from the conference board, that's so important to this process, so that we can demonstrate what the social impact of what that money is doing, so that they can demonstrate it to their investors, so that there's a whole stream and everybody's making money, because at the end of the day, this is all about money. Want to make sure that the investors and the supply side are making their interest, but it's good interest, and our communities are obtaining capital in an untapped way. That's one of the biggest things for the equity market in the globe is Indigenous community is an untapped source of capital, and they're looking for new places to invest. So this is what we've done up here.
Absolutely. And so why is the IGF an important step forward in reconciliation?
It's important because everybody's contributing to Indigenous prosperity, and that's what I've been talking about for almost 6 years, is that there's no prosperity for Canada without Indigenous prosperity, and this tool provides investors with an opportunity to participate in that.
Awesome, yeah. So why is it important for the AFIs and NACA as Indigenous institutions to deliver capital to the Indigenous entrepreneurs? Why is that your mission?
The AFI network has been in place for more than 35 years, and there's always been this perpetual barrier to our Indigenous community to have any sort of economy. We were removed from the market, we're removed from our lands, we're put on reserves, told to just get out of the way while development happens. And this growth funds allows everybody to have an opportunity, and the AFIs to have the capital that they need to plan, to grow businesses, to work with their complex business, like right now with the COVID and with what's going on in the world, this globalization that was the standard path has now changed again. It's like manufacturing is going to come back to Canada. I got Matthew Owl walking around here, and he provided us with our masks. There's manufacturing going on in First Nation communities. We got the government that has a 5% target, and we're still not thinking about procuring in Canada in Indigenous communities when that is now available. So I think we're going to see a trend of more development and more business in the Indigenous community, and all they need is an opportunity, because they'll respond if they have that opportunity.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I'm really excited for that. So going to Allison and Frank here, what has the response been? Like we launched this about a year ago now, right? So, and what lessons have we learned in that time?
Yeah, so we had the first close, that was when the agreements with the investors were signed in 2021, and then opened up for applications from AFIs in October last year. And we had an application in from NEDC fairly quickly after we opened for applications. And I think that went really fast and well, but then there was a little bit of a lull. And then I think what we're learning as we're talking to AFIs is that there seems to be a bit of a capacity gap in the AFIs that is driven by the scarcity that has been in the network for so many years. I think a lot of management and board have gotten quite cautious in terms of expansion plans, hiring plans. And then also COVID has brought on challenges and also large new programs that AFIs were delivering. The emergency loan program that when NACA flowed funds to AFIs to provide emergency loans to Indigenous businesses. That was a large program, and I'm sure Geraldine can speak to the amount of effort that went into that. There is a new women's program now that NACA and the AFIs are rolling out. So what we're seeing is we have these AFIs that often have somewhere around 5 staff, 1 GM. I think there's a bit of a capacity limitation in terms of just plain bandwidth to apply for, plan, and roll out all these new initiatives. So that's something that we're seeing. And we seem to be getting a lot of interest now. I think that the very helpful March 31st government fiscal year end is over. That's a big bonus for us. It seems like a lot of people were waiting for that to roll out. But there seems to be a bit of a gap, and Geraldine can speak to that a bit more as well. I'm sure that there is of course an application process for IGF, so it takes some thought to put the application together. And I think also importantly, it takes some thought to plan out the growth. Now all of a sudden there is a lot more money available to the AFIs, and rather than thinking about how can I make my budget just about last until the end of the fiscal year, you can actually think about how do I grow the services and then financing that I can make available to the businesses in my community.
Yeah, and I had noticed that previously, and not to date myself, but going back to more of the mid-90s and that, is it seemed a lot of the programming that was available to would-be entrepreneurs were more, I guess, like cottage business, right? Very small enterprises and that. Are we seeing a movement towards larger scale? I don't know if you wanted to take a stab at that, Geraldine. Are we seeing a little bit more grander visions now than maybe we have been seeing over the last 20 years?
Yeah, you could definitely say that. Within NEDC, we've seen the growth for so many clients who started out with high-risk business startups, and now we're seeing the progression of that. So we are seeing clients accessing the IGF fund who started with us, who we took a risk on because they had a viable business plan. And it's just really amazing to see these businesses grow and be able to help them. In terms of capacity, what you were saying, Frank, I definitely agree it can be difficult at times, but if you don't put yourself out there, if you don't take that risk to put yourself forward and access the money, how can you ask your clients to put themselves forward and to apply for the money that they need to take that next step?
Absolutely, and that's kind of the messaging I try to give would-be entrepreneurs. I always remind them that wage-based labor actually replaced slavery as the next best option for moving labor. So entrepreneurship, good, right? Think about that. Allison, do you mind if I totally go off script and throw you a curveball just since I have you here at the table?
All good.
Now, within the Indigenous community, we get a lot of very anti-capital, anti-capitalism kind of themes, very socialist a lot of times, a lot to do with our traditions. We're a communal people and that, right? So entering into this entrepreneurship, I think there's a lot of fear about kind of who the capital markets are, what the capital markets are, and why they would want to have anything to do with us Indigenous people, right? So now something I got to learn about over the last few years is, what I think capital has discovered in Asia and Africa is this catch-up effect. So are you hearing anything out there about kind of some excitement about it, or are they just kind of just trying to throw us a bone because it's the right thing to do? Like, what is the attitude of the capital markets?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, speaking as a Crown Corporation, and again, my colleagues in the room, EDC, FCC, who I think we're all impact oriented. We all have social purpose behind what we do, right? So we don't exactly look like the big bad capital markets as in core investors in the fund. But the private sector who we're bringing in, who represent that next iteration, I think you'd be, I sit on a board of an institutional investor network that represents all of the world's largest sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, that sort of big capital.
The big money.
And I would tell you that I've never seen a community globally as thoughtful and aware now of these ESG aspects, right? So they're very concerned about climate. They're very concerned about the social risks around what some of their businesses might be doing across the world in supply chains, what countries they're operating in, with what kinds of human rights profile. And they're also just really concerned about the businesses they support being good corporate citizens, having purpose to why they're developed as a business. So actually, I think you've seen a real transformation in institutional investors, because remember, there's like at the same time, you've got this great young generation of people coming up, developing businesses or taking over their family businesses who want to do things and drive forward with purpose. You've got all those young people working in the capital markets who want to take the power of that capital and are starting to think about investing with purpose. To Shannon's earlier point, like there's a lot of capital out there that's looking to be placed in places where it can have genuine impact, because we all have global issues to solve like climate, and it doesn't happen if we don't work together. It's the same in the case of Indigenous communities. People want to see inclusion. They want to see prosperity in the Indigenous community. They want to be part of helping in that way. So, do I think every aspect of the capital markets is like that? No, of course not. But there's a significant portion that is and has not had a way to have a dialogue with you as a community because they didn't have these vehicles. This is now a vehicle that allows for that dialogue and for that participation. And I think you're just going to see more of them start to happen because, as Shannon and Frank and Geraldine has said, there's great businesses out there and they all need different types of capital, and there'll be different ways that we understand how to sort of channel that need into creating additional vehicles of capital or different pathways to get the capital to these incredible community of entrepreneurs who are currently underserved. Like that's part of the efficiency of the capital markets. Eventually, we try to make that demand and supply meet by having a few intermediaries like the Crowns sit down and do the work of figuring out how do we bring those partnerships together.
Awesome. Oh, and last one, and maybe we'll see about taking some questions from the audience, but Frank, where can everybody find more information about the Indigenous Growth Fund?
We have some more information on the NACA website. There's a section on the Indigenous Growth Fund. I think the important thing for most businesses to keep in mind is that it is all about finding the right AFI in your area and talk to the AFI if you're accessing money and hoping to access some of this capital. That is the key message for entrepreneurs and for the AFIs in the room. They can reach out to myself or my colleague Sarah McNeil to set up an introductory meeting where we walk you through the application and decision-making process around accessing the IGF.
Okay. Now I know we're all getting a little hungry, but we do have time for a question or two. We have 2 mics at the front here, so if anybody's interested in being brave and taking the mic here, and just state your name and organization if you can do that. So, any questions from the audience? Oh, I see some brave soul getting up. Oh, I know that guy. Come on up.
Is that on?
Yeah.
First, I want to say Shannon Naka and Geraldine with NEDC. You guys are pioneers, and this changes everything for us AFIs. I'm so looking forward to being involved and see how our AFI could, get these funds out and really create business. We've been preparing for the last 2 years, upping our game in our business planning, our training, our lending policies, all help from NACA, of course. And, we would have been up here, applying like NEDC sooner, but back in the interior, we went through atmospheric rivers, heat domes, floods, fires, evacuations, even one of our First Nation communities was overrun by grasshoppers, so we actually had locusts.
And meanwhile, there was some big cold or flu going around or something. I was hearing. I don't know if everybody heard about that, but yeah, something.
On top of COVID, so, you know, my name is George from Central Ontario First Nations AFI, and we're looking forward to really being involved and getting this off the ground for us.
So, you know, now I got to ask you a question though.
Yeah.
How does it feel to now have access to $150 million?
Well, up until now, you know, the bigger loans, I send them to our neighbors or national banks, or, you know, to be able to tell our clients, I could lend you larger amounts. I don't have to just bridge finance. I'm no longer that $125,000, $150,000 cap. I can do it all for you. And I think that's going to change everything for our organization and for our clients.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. We got 4 minutes left there. If anybody else had a question or comment or anything like that. I see one of my cousins getting up there. I don't know if he's yeah. Oh yeah. They're all cousins. We're all cousins, right? So.
Thank you, Frank, for the kind moderation of this incredible panel that we have in front of us, and Shannon and all the guests this morning. My name is Keith Matthew. I'm a NACA board member for British Columbia, and George, who just got up here, he's our general manager for the Community Futures Development Corp for Central Ontario First Nations out of Kamloops. We've been waiting for this opportunity for a long time, and it's prevented us from growth. It's prevented us from helping our Indigenous entrepreneurs step up that next level. The next opportunity for us as Indigenous people is actually harnessing that power that we're building within our communities of Indigenous business leaders, and using that combined knowledge and experience to take us to the next level. And it's going to be exponential growth for us. So I congratulate all of you for the work that you're doing in helping us achieve those goals as Indigenous entrepreneurs. And we need that, because for us, a job is better than welfare. And Satsen in my community said, we need to put new memories in the minds of our children. And what that means to me is building that future and helping them achieve their dreams. He said they didn't grow up to dream about being on welfare. That's not their dream. Our dream is to work hard, and put that back into our community. So I thank all of you for the incredible hard work that you're doing. Kukstem, all my relations.
Thank you, Chief Matthew. Go ahead, Jay. Absolutely. That's as high as it goes. I'm sorry.
I'm with Broadband Communications North, based out of Winnipeg. We service Indigenous communities, and we are owned by Indigenous communities in Northern Manitoba. One of the big challenges we have is connectivity. We have currently requests with the Universal Broadband Fund for over $200 million. Yes, that's great. What happens if we get the money? Unfortunately, ECN has said we're on the hook for 5% of $200 million. We don't actually have that money. So coming here to this forum, this is a great opportunity to bridge some gaps to help improve connectivity. And just wondering, is this have anything to do with stacking? What's the eligibility when it comes to the federal government? Is this private equity? How would it be interpreted on the federal side?
So are we able to use these dollars to leverage with other options, or partnering with other institutions as well?
Yeah, and I think it's actually a good question. So we had the question earlier, difference between, you know, traditional government contribution agreement and the IGF capital and the agreements that AFI signed for IGF capital. From our end, we don't impose any stacking limits. So some of those kind of limitations that other funders put in place would not apply for IGF money. One thing for the AFI that we very much want to see is that we leverage some existing loan portfolio at the AFI level. But other than that, we don't impose any restrictions. So if there was a business that comes to an AFI and says, look, I've got a contribution, in this case, for rolling out broadband in a community. I've got some of my own equity and I now need a business loan to finance the whole project. From our perspective, there wouldn't be anything in the way of doing that. And I think that's one of the upsides of this fund, is that there are fairly few strings of that nature attached to the money.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd like to thank everybody for listening to us. I think lunch is probably just about ready here. So I'd like to thank our panelists one more time, Frank, Allison, Shannon, Geraldine. And hey, we're all cousins here. So if you see these guys walking around, feel free to jump in there and ask any follow-up questions and see how you can benefit from the Indigenous Growth Fund. Thank you very much. Kinnan Askamitten.
Thank you. Good job. Good job.
Thanks, Frank. Well done.
Thanks for moderating.
Okay, so we are going to break for lunch. We'll come back at 1 p.m. sharp. You can eat in here, obviously, most of you. And Spirit Wolf Singers have agreed to do some more songs for us at lunch. I don't think they're playing for the full hour, but just as we're happy to see them, I think they're happy to be able to play for us after 2 years of breaks. Thank you.